Hi everyone, today's video is going to be about differentiation, also known as how to find a derivative. So if a question asks you how to find the derivative or to derive this equation, they will give you an equation in the form of f of x or y equals to any equation that involves a pronumeral. Then the question, like I said, will ask you to derive it. Now there's a basic formula that you need to follow, and if you follow this formula, you're set to go for pretty much every question. Obviously, some questions will be more advanced, so you have to think more carefully about it. However, it's the same principle. So, just another rule, when you're writing the derivative, the way that it is noted as is by putting a dash. So if you're using f of x notation, you write f dash of x. Similarly, if you're using the y notation, you write y dash. Alright, here in the original equation, a is a constant, so let's just write that. And basically what that means is that it's not a pronumeral, it's a number, it's a value. X is the pronumeral, and n is the power, and n can be another constant, so it can be a number, or in more advanced questions, it can be another type of pronumeral. But you still end up following the same formula, so it's fine. Alright, so the formula that you're going to follow is you bring down the power and multiply it by whatever the constant is. Now in some questions the constant will be 1 and therefore there will be no number here, but it just means that you multiply the power by 1. So let's just write that we've brought the n down, the power down, and we are multiplying it. So that's what that dot notates as. It means multiply it by whatever the constant is, so a in this case, then multiply it again by the pronumeral and rewrite out the original power, but this time minus it by 1. So this is the formula that you're going to follow. F dash x or y dash equals to the power times by the constant times by the pronumeral to the power of the original power minus 1. So remember this formula. Alright, so let's go into some examples just so we can consolidate and apply what we've just learnt. One of the most basic questions that you might get in either practice questions or even the first question on your exam will be, for example, y equals to x squared, and the question will ask you to find the derivative of that. So all we do is, first of all, write y dash, because if you rewrite y equals, that's not the derivative, that's the original equation. So you need to write y dash so the teacher knows that you are finding the derivative and you've started to answer the question. Right, so now, the first step that we did in the original formula is we brought down the power and multiplied by the constant that was in front of the pronumeral. So let's bring down the 2, because that's the power, and multiply it by the constant that's in front of the x. In this case, there is no constant in front of the x, which means that there is actually a 1 in front of the x. So you don't have to write that. If you're comfortable with algebra, you'll know that you don't need to write if it's multiplied by 1. So we'll just leave it like that. Then the next step was to rewrite the pronumeral. So usually the pronumeral in the questions that you get will be x, but sometimes your teacher might like to change it up a bit and they might change the pronumeral to a different letter, but it's still the same concept. Alright, now the next step was to rewrite the power, so in this case the power was 2, but minus it by 1. So now technically this is a correct answer. This will get you full marks. However, in most schools, most teachers like to give full marks only to the most simplified answer, and this is not the most simplified answer. We can clean this up a little bit more. So let's equal it again, and let's get rid of this dot, because this dot just means multiply. So let's just write 2x, and now 2 minus 1 is 1. But in algebra, if you are comfortable with algebra, you know that if there is something to the power of 1, you just don't write the power. So technically, this is the answer. So therefore, the derivative of y equals x squared is 2x. Now if you write this in your exam or your homework questions, you should get 100% for that question. So f of x, which is the same as y, it doesn't matter which one you decide to use. However, I would recommend following whatever the question says. So if the question uses f of x, when you're finding the derivative, write f dash x. If the question uses y, then when you're finding the derivative, use y dash. Now, the question is asking us to find the derivative of this, so let's start. It's the same concept. Now, you might be thinking, well, what happens if in the equation there is more than one x? Because in the first example that we did, there was only one x. It's the same thing. You just do the same as this original formula for each x. Alright, so let's start. So first let's start off with 3x to the power of 4. So again, you bring down the power and multiply it by the constant. So in this case, the power is 4 and the constant is 3. So let's multiply it. Then you rewrite the prenumeral. Then you rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Now obviously, as you get more advanced and more comfortable in doing these questions, then you don't have to write 4 minus 1, you'll immediately write 3. But obviously that's according to how comfortable you are in skipping that minus step. Alright, so now the next one, we'll go on to 4x cubed. So we bring down the power and multiply it by the constant. So in this case, the power is 3 and the constant is 4. Then you rewrite the prenumeral, rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Then we go minus because that's the symbol, and let's go on to 2x. So, like I said before when I said here, if there is no power written, that means the power is 1. So just to make us understand, let me just write the 1 here. Now, we bring down the power and multiply it by the 2, just like we did for the other ones. Just running out of room here, so I'll just go underneath. Then you rewrite the prenumeral, and you rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Now, let's go to the next step. So let's simplify this. So 4 times 3 is 12. X, 4 minus 1 is 3. Plus 3 times 4 is again 12. X to the power of 3 minus 1, which is x to the power of 2. Then 1 times 2 is 2. X. And now the power here is 1 minus 1, which is 0. And now if you are comfortable with algebra and you're comfortable with maths, then you know that anything to the power of 0 equals to 1. So x to the power of 0 will equal to 1. So if the question is asking to find the most simplified version, you cannot keep it as this. You need to go ahead and, simplify it further to what it actually is equivalent to, which is 1. So this is like writing 2 times 1, so 2 times 1 is 2. So now this is your final answer. Now as you get comfortable, you'll realize that any prenumeral that is to the power of 1, it just ends up disappearing, so you don't need to go through that step, just the constant will remain. Now you might be thinking, how do I find the derivative of just a constant? Because so far we've only talked about finding the derivative of something that has a prenumeral in it, and we'll get to that. So again, bring down the power and multiply it by the constant, so 100 times by 20. Rewrite the prenumeral, then rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Then go to the next step. So bring down the power, multiply it by the constant, rewrite the prenumeral, rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Now we've reached to the constant, and now let's see how we would do this. So if you recall, in the previous example I said that anything to the power of 0 equals to 1. And 1 times anything will be anything. So 1 times 2 equals to 2. 1 times 3 equals to 3. 1 times 100 equals to 100. So another way of writing just 2 is writing 2 times 1, correct? But another way of writing that is 2 times x to the power of 0, because we said that x to the power of 0 equals to 1. Now, if we have x to the power of 0, we've gone back to our original formula, which was deriving a prenumeral. So now we can just do it the same way. So again, bring down the power and multiply it by the constant at the front. So 0 times 2. Rewrite the prenumeral, rewrite the power and minus it by 1. Now let's go ahead and simplify this. Minus 15. x to the power of 4. Okay, now 0 times 2 equals to 0. 0 times x to the power of minus 1 will also be 0. So therefore, it disappears basically. And now you will learn, once you're more comfortable, that when you're deriving a constant, it will just disappear. So you don't need to go through all this trouble, but that's just the explanation of how you still follow the same concept, even if it doesn't have a prenumeral.